Lauren Summers. I'm the Senior Director of Lifelong Learning and Travel at the Yale Alumni Association. And this is the first of several sessions in about a week of conversations on climate change. This is an annual series. We started doing it in 2020. We're celebrating our 5th anniversary this year, something that we are very proud of. And we are even more proud of our partnerships with schools and units around Yale University who are interested in this topic. Today, our partners are Yale Planetary Solutions, and they are our co-sponsors for the entire climate change series in 2024. Julie Zimmerman is the inaugural Vice Provost for Planetary Solutions at Yale University. She has appointments in both the Department of Chemical and Environmental Engineering, the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, as well as the School of the Environment. So Yale Planetary Solutions is really looking at interdisciplinary approaches to climate change. She's going to be able to tell you more about that. Julie's research focuses on innovations in sustainable technologies and policies necessary to advance them. She serves as the Deputy Director for the Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale, and she holds leadership positions in both national and international research consortia. In addition, Julie teaches at the Yale School of Management's Executive Education program on sustainability and leadership. Beyond her roles at Yale, Julie is the editor-in-chief of Environmental Science and Technology, which is the most highly cited journal in the fields of environmental science and engineering. Our second presenter, our co-presenter, is Sara Smiley Smith, and Sara is the Assistant Provost for Planetary Solutions. In this role, she works to implement strategic initiatives, expand interdisciplinary collaboration, build capacity, and engage stakeholders both within and beyond Yale's campus. Prior to this role, Sara was Associate Dean of Academic Affairs, Research, and Sustainability at the Yale School of the Environment. She earned her PhD from the School of Environment in 2016, and she completed the joint master's degree between the School of Epidemiology and Public Health and YSC in 2007. She's been at Yale for quite a while, and she's also had the opportunity to work in the university's Office on Sustainability. So I want to welcome you both, Julie and Sara. Thank you so much for kicking us off on our climate change conversation series. And I'm going to pass it to you for the presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. And thanks for everyone for joining. We're really excited to talk to you about climate change, which is even more timely, and especially about some of the theory behind how we're approaching planetary solutions and then how we're operationalizing it. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And I think the big message here, and it's what's really exciting to me, is that Yale recognized in launching the climate and sustainability work at the university that understanding planetary problems was not enough, and that we really oriented the work towards solutions. So bringing to bear new technology, new policy, new ways of thinking to ensure that we were actually addressing the problem and not just studying how bad things are or could get. I like to frame this in the work that we do, and it sounds like many of you are on the same page already, in thinking about when we look back and wonder how generations before us or society before us thought about social constructs or different social norms, and how we look back at them now and think that is absurd. So you could go back and look at how women didn't have the right to vote, something that would be intolerable and unacceptable today is absurd. And generations today look back at those past generations and wonder how that was the social norm. You could look back through numerous magazines and find advertisements about doctors telling you to smoke because it was good for you. Again, this is absurd given our knowledge and awareness today, and we look back on these past generations and wonder how that was acceptable. You could go very far back and talk about bloodletting or people thinking that the earth was flat. I do recognize there are some people who still think that today. And then we should look at absurdity now. And these are the things that I think about future generations looking back on us and wondering how this was okay, this was socially acceptable, this was the norm, this is how things were done. So you could look at the entire chemical industry, right? That's all the materials, products, durable goods, everything you go into a store and buy is a chemical and has come through the chemical industry. And the largest product that the chemical industry produces is carbon dioxide. This is absurd, right? This has no economic value. This is a waste product. It's causing environmental and social challenges. And this is how things are today. You could look at how much drinking water is flushed in the United States every day, 2.3 billion gallons that we treat to drinking water quality standard and then flush down the toilet. And that is enough to meet the daily potable water demands for all of Africa. So again, this is quite absurd and talk about all the embedded energy and resources and cost that's associated with this and how wasteful it is. There was a study by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation that came out that said there'll be about a little over a megaton of fish in the ocean by 2050, and there will also be a little over a megaton of plastic in the ocean by 2050. I'm quite confident that future generations will look back on a statistic like this and wonder how this was acceptable, that this was as things were, this is the status quo, and that they will find this to be quite absurd. And the last one is really work from uh, research that I do that's very close to me. And this is from the Centers of Disease Control, started doing what they call a body burden study. The first one came out in 2015. And they identified 287 different synthetic chemicals in the umbilical cord of newborns. Of these, 180 are known carcinogens, 208 are suspected to cause developmental challenges, and several of these chemicals have been banned since the 1970s. This is absurd when we think about the generation that is being born now that is already contaminated, if you will, with all of these chemicals that were designed for a function, for a purpose, but have persisted or bioaccumulated or have toxic effects, not because they were designed to, but because it wasn't thought about at the design stage. So really what all of this is unintended consequences of providing the things that society and our economy need and that people demand and improve quality of life and extend life expectancy. There is a lot of value that all of these things bring, from the chemical industry to what plastics do in our world to making sure that we have clean, fresh drinking water. What is unfortunate in how this comes about, how these absurdities arise, is that there are often unintended consequences in how we have delivered or designed these things. And often what we see is that as we try to solve one problem, provide chemicals, provide materials, provide drinking water, deliver healthcare, you could go on to this list, that we solve that problem and then unintentionally create a new or bigger problem somewhere else in the system. This is something I like to call doing the right things wrong. So yes, we need to generate energy. We need to provide water. We need to feed 8 billion people on the planet. We need to ensure that we have a high quality of life and life expectancy. It's not that we shouldn't be doing those things. Those are the right things to do. It's that the way we have done them is causing unintended consequences for people and the planet. And a way to think about this is one of my favorite New Yorker cartoons is this guy is trying to get some space, and if he could just push on the wall, he would get that space. And often what we find is when we try to solve one of these problems, it winds up that there is some connection that comes back and causes more problems for us in the future. So I was trained as an engineer, and this is often how we are taught, right? This is a very much still to this day how we train scientists, engineers, innovators. You have a problem, you come up with a great idea, and you put your solution out into the world. And this has worked really well. You could look at transportation or wastewater treatment or manufacturing or communications or healthcare or even artificial intelligence. And it's amazing the innovation and creativity that we have brought to bear and the things we have introduced into the world that have never been seen before. there's just one problem with how we have done this, and that is we often don't get the problem right. So we might, for example, say it's really important to provide clean water, but we forget to say we should do that without using and generating toxic chemicals. Or we need to generate energy, but can we do it without altering the atmosphere of the only planet that we have? Or we need to produce goods and services for society and the economy, but we forgot to say, can we do it without depleting finite resources and generating waste? And you could go on and on to any number of problems that we have been asked to solve through science, through technology, through policy, and that the solutions we have come up with have often met the functional need that we have asked for, but we forgot to include the constraints or the considerations of people and the planet in terms of health and well-being. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sarah to introduce the idea of systems thinking and how we start to avoid some of these unintended consequences.
Thanks, Julie. You can go to the next slide. So when we're thinking about systems, in fact, we all are born thinking about systems, and we grow up using curiosity to guide us in exploring systems of both social and natural world. You could imagine yourself being in the kitchen as a kid and making your own recipe and putting all sorts of ingredients in, and then, adjusting oven temperatures and thinking about different outcomes there. You could also imagine yourself outside, maybe dropping rocks in a stream and changing the flow of the stream based on different construction techniques you might employ. So we think about systems, or we grow up with this ability to think about systems, but somewhere along the way, we start to get the message that there's a right answer to different types of questions or different challenges that might be put in front of us. And I think society in many ways rewards that approach. And what we need, and specifically what Planetary Solutions is working to try to continue to strengthen, is our ability to think in systems and to train people to think in systems so that we're incorporating all of the downstream effects and all of the effects overall of a decision or a change that might be made. You can go to the next slide, Julie. So when we are actually thinking in systems, this enables us to do some pretty magical things. We can change our thinking. We can have a different perspective on what's happening in front of us when we're actually thinking about the complex interactions that might underlie that. It can change how we communicate with others, thinking about giving us new ways of thinking about and seeing the information that's in front of us. It can change our behavior, how we're actually working with others or how we're realizing our vision. You can use systems thinking to identify and test a wider variety of possible actions. I think this is my favorite because it's the opportunity to really employ systems thinking to explore the world and explore different ways that you can have an effect. You can use systems thinking simply to be more aware of the potential for unintended consequences. You can use it to harness social learning processes to develop a shared understanding. And finally, to expand the choices that are even available to you because you have a better vision on all of the systemic interactions that are out there. Next slide. But of course, it's not that simple. Systems are all different in themselves. Some are more simple, some are more complicated, some have more complex structures, some are more adaptive. And in order to be able to really leverage a system and all of its interactions, you need to understand it at the same time. Each of these will require different management approaches. So if the system provides a context in which you might be working to solve a problem, the problems themselves lie on a continuum as well. And here you can see the axes are agreement and certainty. You can go from a very simple problem that's quite clear and there's a lot of agreement about what it is, to a more complicated, difficult problem, and finally to these complex, wicked problems at the furthest end of the spectrum. Next slide. So for difficult problems, these are in the middle. They're characteristically smaller scale and more well-defined than wicked problems, but they're still difficult problems. But they often have more limited time scale, limited applications, sort of the priorities and who's defining the problem is more clear, a more recognizable solution that might not be so far out of the box. You know what needs to be done. Fewer actors involved, so fewer decision makers at the table, and can be treated somewhat in an isolated or a standalone matter. But when you move forward to wicked problems, this is where I think a lot of planetary solutions actually are needed, is in this wicked problem space. So when this terminology was first put together, it was in comparison in many ways to natural sciences that could run their inquiry, explore their question in a very controlled environment, where you could control all the variables and understand cause and effect in a very refined way. But when you look at social problems, planning problems, policy problems, these are inherently wicked, so to speak, because they refuse to be constrained in that same way. You can't put them in a box. You can't isolate them. They're a problem in many ways because of the system in which they exist, and certainly exacerbated by the systems as well. I think next slide, Julie. So with these wicked problems, they have a number of attributes that make them challenging or extra challenging beyond the difficult problems. They're bigger, they're poorly defined, they often have a limited an unlimited time scale. There's no obvious solution. People don't agree on what to do about them. There's a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different decision makers typically at the table. You can't disentangle the problem itself from the context. They're one and the same. And certainly there are greater implications for a long-term challenge as a result of these wicked problems. Next slide. Oh, I'll pass it back to you, Julie.
Yes, thanks, Sarah. So with this framing of what is it that we need to do and act with urgency, thinking about what future generations are going to question us about, and using this frame, this theoretical underpinning of systems thinking to complement reductionism or those controlled experiments, Yale launched Planetary Solutions. And this is building on a long history at the university. So if you look back to the early 1900s, Yale had the first forest school in the United States when Teddy Roosevelt founded the National Forests. He partnered with Gifford Pinchot to found the Yale Forest School and set us on a course of not only generating new knowledge, but training leaders who are going to take that knowledge and apply it in the world for environmental benefit and social benefit. Bookended by this is last year, Yale University, along with lots of partners in the city of New Haven and the state of Connecticut, stood up Climate Haven. Climate Haven is a climate technology incubator and accelerator. So startup companies from Yale, but from any other organization or from people's garages and basements, as we have seen, can get membership at Climate Haven, have co-working space, have incubator space, and the programming there is bringing venture capital and private equity and business mentors and legal advisors so that these companies can incubate before they're ready to launch and stand up on their own. So where we started, how did Planetary Solutions get going? So if we look back in 2018, our now provost, Scott Strobel, led the university science strategy for the university. And it was to go around and identify 5 areas where the university was going to invest resources and capital and building and faculty in moving the science forward, that Yale could move the needle. And Planetary Solutions was one of the 5 that was identified. Unlike the other 4, Planetary Solutions has both an academic footprint, but also an operational one in terms of thinking about how we operate, manage our own campus, from transportation to food service to the buildings that we build and power. Yale also has this long history of being at the leading edge of setting climate goals for our own operations. So in 2005, then President Levin established the first climate goal for a university in North America and had lots of presidents join and follow us. That has evolved to our latest climate goals right now, which say by 2035, Yale University will be net zero for carbon emissions, and by 2050, absolute zero. What this means is that we are working diligently to improve renewable energy on campus and generate what we can. So we'll rely on our utility grid here in Connecticut as it gets greener. And then what we're doing on our own campus is building out geothermal heating and cooling plants for Science Hill, for the new engineering school, and every new building actually that is going in on campus. The other work that's happening is to bend the curve of energy demand or energy consumption on campus, and that's through efficiency and policy changes, and then also going back and retrofitting and renovating these old, beautiful historic buildings on campus to be more energy conserving so that we can have those two lines meet, where we have green, carbon-free energy, and we can meet our demand with what we can produce. When we think about planetary solutions, or in fact, the work of the university writ large, it's everything from education and research to operations and how the university engages externally. So when we look at education on campus, there were over 70 courses that were taught in our spring semester last year, integrating climate change into it. We also see an emergence of programs and fellowships to support either bringing people to campus to get trained and think about climate and climate solutions, or thinking about how to engage people who may have graduated from the university before, like yourselves, or who can't come to New Haven for whatever reason, but need this knowledge to actually implement and enact solutions on the climate crisis. And so there are over 10 non-degree certificate programs run by the university across all different domains, from the School of Public Health to the School of the Environment, to help put this knowledge out into the world in a way that's accessible to people all over the globe. When we talk about research in planetary solutions, we're really interested in this idea of interdisciplinary work, and that is reflected in this idea of systems thinking, that we can't just have a technological solution. You need to think about the policy that will enable it, and which communities will benefit and which ones will bear the cost of bringing that new technology to bear. What are the health implications? How do we tell the story about this new technology or this new innovation? And so all of the research centers that are affiliated with Planetary Solutions are really sitting at the nexus of multiple departments or multiple schools to practice and implement systems thinking. I've talked a little bit about operations already. Lots of work going on campus to think about not just our climate goal, but how does that impact biodiversity on campus, and what our stormwater management plan might be, and how do we bring the research that's happening on campus into our own operations. And then for external engagement, everything from the UN Climate Conference of the Parties meeting that's just wrapping up in Baku now, and how our faculty and students go to those meetings, to events that we might host ourselves, or through the Yale program on climate change communication, and thinking about how do we talk to people where they are, meet them where they are, to talk about climate change to help people find reason to act. So there's lots already happening at the university, many stars, as it's often said, but maybe not enough constellations. Finding those synergies, bringing the sum that's greater than the parts of what's happening here already. And we like to think about this even as we're not an org chart, but we want to think about Yale as a community and as a university. What would it mean to bring to bear all that Yale is on these problems? So where are we now in terms of planetary solutions? We've just finished running a steering committee process to write our first of what will be several reports about how the university is going to use systems thinking and operationalize these ideas in our work on climate and sustainability. You'll notice that this committee was chaired by myself, but also the vice president for facilities, showing that integration of academics and operations. And the committee was made up of people from deans of various schools to faculty to operational leaders on campus. This resulted in a mission statement for the work of Planetary Solutions that is catalyzing planetary solutions through all that Yale is and all that Yale does. This is the idea that it is all that we are. It's our faculty, our students, our staff, but it's also our buildings and our campus, our resources, our collections. And it's all that we do, from teaching and research to learning to investing and buying and operating and leading. This is the idea that we're going to bring all that Yale has to solve these challenges and to address the climate crisis. There's also a humility to this statement in that it's Yale is going to do all that we can, but we need partners and we need people outside the university to work with us to advance these planetary solutions. And so we're going to do all we can, and we hope and expect that our partners and people around the world will do all they can to advance planetary solutions. So when we look across these four buckets and the work that we can do, this is all really with an eye towards having impact, not just on our campus or in New Haven, but really in the world to mitigate the climate crisis and help people respond. What we have found is that it is not any one of these buckets acting individually or in silos, but it is really the intersection of education and research. How do we use that on our campus? How do we take our research and engage with people off of campus to bring that to bear on policy decision or community decision and action? And that's really where we're going to find impact in this work. Planetary Solutions is gigantic, and I have gotten many jokes about intergalactic and solving problems on Mars. And so it's really important that we focus our work and pick lenses that make sense for us to address planetary solutions here on campus. Through the work of that steering committee, we identified 3 lenses that we'll use to think about planetary solutions and organize the work on campus: education, research, and operations, and then how we'll invite partners to engage with us. The first, of course, climate change, both mitigating and adapting. The second on biodiversity and ecosystems, both protecting what is left and restoring what we've lost. And the third is around communities and societies, and that is to think about how to ensure people are thriving and prospering as we make this transition and we address these multiple crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. We like this analogy of lenses because it lets us think about different ways of how we might organize and do the work on campus. We might just think about climate change and come up with a technology or a policy that addresses that, or we might put that together with a community and society focus and think about how we might do that work in a context of a just transition. So lots of efforts underway, and I'm going to turn it over to Sara to give you an update on what we've been up to.
Do you want to speak to the chemicals management, Julie, or do you want me to do that one?
Oh, sure. I can do this really quickly. Sorry, I didn't realize that was next. This has been a really interesting project here on campus. As I mentioned, we're trying to bend that curve on getting energy demand down in our buildings. As many of you know, our science buildings, where our scientists and engineers are working and doing research, is actually some of the most energy intensive activities on campus. And we want to turn down the energy use in those buildings while protecting environmental health and safety, the workers that are in those spaces. It turns out that the air exchange rate, how often you have to turn over the air in the building, is dependent on what chemicals are in the building and how they're being used and stored. And if we want to dial down the energy use, we need to actually have all this information on what chemicals are being bought and where they are and when they're used up and disposed of. And so this very quickly became one of these systems challenges of, hey, I want to turn down the energy use in the building, but we now need procurement and transportation and our researchers to actually sit together and talk about how we are going to have knowledge and data to allow us to turn down that energy use in buildings. And it's a great example of academic and operations working together to help us meet those climate goals. And our researchers now thinking about the nature of the chemicals that they're using and maybe picking something that has a lower burden so that we can change that energy use. And in fact, it's driving new innovation in terms of new research and chemistry that's happening on campus.
So in addition to the great work that's happening within labs, we are also seeing innovation coming from really every corner of operations on the campus. But I'm going to highlight here an exciting project that's going on within Yale Dining. Some of you may already be aware of this, but I was somewhat shocked to find out that Yale Dining serves approximately 2 million meals annually. So they are churning through a tremendous amount of material on a daily basis and having to make a lot of complicated decisions about how to stock kitchens, how to understand demand, et cetera. And so one of the interesting tools that they put in place in March of this year, 2024, was an AI-driven camera system that sits over the waste bins within the kitchen prep area. So this is behind the serving area, and the camera is focused down into what would usually be going to our compost facility. And the camera comes up with an idea of what it thinks that waste is, as you can see in the image on the upper right of the screen. And the kitchen staff person says, yep, this is cucumbers. And then they also indicate why it was wasted. Was it over prepped? Did it spoil? Was there something else going on with it? They have a couple of different options, and then on they go. And so the system collects all of this information, and it's been a fantastic application of AI within operational systems. And in speaking with Dan Flynn, who's the operations manager, he was able to share an interesting anecdote that they looked at the data in one of the early months over the summer, and they realized that they were throwing away all of these green onions. And he was like, why in the world why do we have so many green onions? What is going on? Why are they always getting thrown away? And they were always getting thrown away with the reason code of spoilage. So something was off. So he and the chefs looked at where in the menu green onions were indicated and realized they really only had 2 places in the menu that green onions were being used. They then further realized that with the suppliers who were bringing green onions to campus, there was only one size of green onion that they could buy. It was a box that had 12 different packs in it. And they realized we're never going to get through that in the period of time, the ordering window. And so they worked with the supplier, changed the packaging of green onions that come to campus, and were able to eliminate that waste stream altogether. And so that's just one small story, one anecdote of how they're using this information. And right now, Dining, in collaboration with the Office of Sustainability, has hired some students to build a dashboard that will use this AI data to inform to provide chefs with more real-time information about exactly what's going on with the waste streams in their kitchens. They can use that to inform their purchasing decisions. Purchasing can therefore use it to help in their negotiation with suppliers. It's a really, I think, quite an interesting information story for how we can improve the way we're working sustainably here on campus. Next slide. So in addition to the great things happening in operations on campus, I also wanted to just spend a few seconds talking about the seed grants that YPS offers. I think this is one of the most tangible ways you can see the effect of Planetary Solutions work kind of in the immediate here on campus. We gave out 22 different awards this year. In this year's cycle, this was our 3rd cycle of seed grants. The total awarded was about $2 million. And the awards themselves were spread amongst PIs across the university with really great representation from across all the schools and departments. So this award I wanted to highlight went to Liza Kamita, who's at the School of the Environment, looking at AI-powered identification of tropical seedlings using hyperspectral and 3D data. So the researchers have proposed that they'll go into the forests of Panama, use this hyperspectral and 3D data collection methodology, train an AI model to identify seedlings, and then be able to use that data down the road to help with additional models and additional plant ID, which is something that takes an inordinate amount of time for field researchers to do. So this has the ability to really dramatically increase the pace at which their work can happen. So that's quite an exciting one. The next, this is Hailing Wang. He's looking at methanol production from CO2. And the challenge with this, methanol is a really energy dense liquid, can be quite helpful, especially in the developing world. The real challenge here is that they need to find a different catalyst. And so they'll be using this award to look at how they can improve this overall process and make it more efficient. And their ambition is to be able to apply for federal funding with this seed grant data in hand. So we're excited to see where this one will go. The next one, PI Steve Barry, who is in the Tobin Center here at the university, looking at better economic models for smarter climate policy. It probably comes as no surprise to this crowd that having strong economic models helps make it easier for those in positions of power to make decisions about how to deploy resources around climate. And so Steve's work is to really focusing on improving those models and improving specifically their empirical underpinnings. This is around issues like the expansion of biofuels, optimizing the energy grid, and looking at things like the global water cycle. So that's going to be an exciting set of models, again, coming from the Tobin Center, which some of you may know better for their work on health policy. So we're excited that they're expanding into the climate space as well. And then the final one that I'll highlight, again, these are just 4 of 22 fantastic awards. I'll drop the link in the chat after I finish presenting, but this one comes from Alan Organsky at the School of Architecture, looking at the use of forest biomass for resilient regional forests and regenerative urban construction. The idea here is working to use more mass timber for mid-rise buildings, essentially providing carbon storage rather than emissions for this type of building construction. And it's really a terrific example of systems thinking, because in his modeling, he's thinking about using regional forest resources sustainably, integrating them and their carbon storage capacity into those cities within those regions, and making sure that the jobs and the opportunities stay within that system as well. So lots of co-benefits to be seen from that one as that research rolls out. Back to you, Julie.
Great. So as Sara mentioned, we've been running the seed grant program for a while, 3 years as Planetary Solutions started to emerge on campus around 2020 in the middle of the pandemic. We've managed to do some good work. And then last year, Sara and I came into the provost's office to really start investing and focusing on planetary solutions, and have big plans about where we are going to go with this work as we move forward. So we have a number of initiatives. I'm just going to talk about a few to give you a sense of the work that's happening. The first is running a series of summits on campus, using those lenses to bring our community of faculty, students, and staff together to start organizing ourselves. What more research? What new partnerships? What questions are people interested in asking and need a partner somewhere else on campus, or a partner outside off of campus who's in someone's network, and how do we build those connections and those pathways? To ask ourselves the question of, yes, we have a climate goal. What will goals look like in those biodiversity and community and society lenses? And really starting to build, as I said, a community of people who are working on advancing planetary solutions through all the different domains. Next year will be our first cohort of Planetary Solutions graduate student fellows. So these are PhD students who are getting their degree in a discipline or in a school, but have work and an orientation towards planetary solutions. And so we'll collect this community of scholars across the campus and work with them, not to replace the disciplinary work they're doing, that reductionist traditional framing, as we talked about, those controlled experiments, but how do you couple that with systems thinking and introducing them to folks from other disciplines and looking at opportunities that they can start to work together. So we're training people from the very beginning in their doctoral work to have this orientation of bringing systems thinking into their own research. We are looking very hard at Yale's climate goals and these goals we have on campus around 2035 and 2050. What is the likelihood we'll reach these? What new work do we need? What new technologies have emerged since the goals were set? What are limitations? And one of the big questions, and we've talked a little bit about AI and how it's starting to show up in research and being applied to planetary solutions, but the energy demand to power that compute for AI is enormous. And as we introduce that on campus and make it available to our faculty and students, what does that do to our current model? And so we're re-examining all of that, asking questions around carbon offsets and how we are going to realize our net zero and absolute zero goals. And then the last initiative I'll mention briefly is this Catalyst Consortium that we're launching. One of the things Planetary Solutions is really interested in is bringing needs from outside of campus to our researchers so that they're doing work that's inspired by users, and that maybe we are not only doing curiosity-driven research, but doing work that has relevance more immediately and impact on people who need that strategy, those policy, those tools, or those technologies. And so we're looking to build some roundtables and bring folks in so that we can start to understand what needs are and help bring our research to bear on those questions. Other big projects that are going on under Planetary Solutions, as Sara mentioned, there's a lot of work on taking CO2 and converting it to fuels and chemicals. Imagine taking one of our biggest problems and turning it into one of the solutions. How do you make carbon dioxide have economic value as a feedstock so that people want to capture it and use it in value added ways? And so this idea of what can I make out of the air, having carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen available, everything from fuels like methanol or sustainable aviation fuels to things like sugars and amino acids. And we're Yale, so it's not just the science and technology of this, but it's the questions of what does it mean if the means of production are now democratized and anybody who has access to the air and sunlight can make fuels and chemicals and materials, and I'm not reliant on the petroleum resources that are within my political boundaries. We're doing a lot of work to think about how to build community resiliency, and again, work at Yale that's advanced in this place, in this space that has not been seen in many others, is this idea of the role of social or community cohesion in being resilient to climate change. We have now seen research come out from the School of Public Health and other places on campus that says the more connected a community is, the more volunteer hours, the more participation there is from those community members, the faster that community responds and is more resilient to climate events. And you could think to the recent hurricanes that happened in Asheville or down in Florida and how those communities are responding. So we're thinking very hard about how to build dashboards so communities know, yeah, I need to invest in new infrastructure. And yes, we need policy about how high a building needs to be in a flood zone, but we don't want to forget to invest in making sure our community social structure is also strong. And the last thing I'll talk about is Sci by Sci-Fi. This is, again, thinking about Yale and our historic strengths in the arts and humanities, and to make sure that those researchers and faculty and staff on campus feel connected to this work is to start using science fiction and this idea of creating and envisioning a more hopeful future, a more positive future, whether it's in movies or books or video games, and creating those scenarios and then sitting with our scientists and engineers and say, how close or far are we from this more hopeful reality? What innovations do we need so that we start to have dialogue across those disciplines? So we've been very busy, and one of the biggest events that we did this past year that you may have heard about was at Climate Week New York. This runs adjacent to the UN General Assembly. Yale, for the first time, showed up as a coherent collective university at Climate Week. We hosted 4 days of events at the Yale Club across the street from Grand Central Station. We had everything from famous alum like Secretary Kerry and Tom Steyer to our students pitching new startup ideas they have in this space, and then a number of faculty who brought conversations and convened stakeholders to talk about how to bring climate solutions to bear on these challenges and what Yale is doing in this space. Lots more work that we're excited to do, and we are, if you sign up for our newsletter at the end of this, you'll continue to hear about all the new things that we are creating and spinning out for Planetary Solutions. So we often get asked at the end of this, in the next 5 or 10 years, how do you know that Planetary Solutions was successful? What will that look like? There's a few answers to this. One is that interdisciplinary work on campus, this idea of bringing systems thinking to bear, along with our reductionist approaches, will be normal and quite accepted, that user-inspired research will be as valued as curiosity-driven research, that we think about impact, that the boundaries between campus and our stakeholders and translating our knowledge for use in the world will be standard and normal and expected of the people that are here doing this work. We really want Yale to be a role model for this work, and that people are either looking at what we're doing and emulating it in their own place, or they want to be here to do this work with us. And that we will have realized our goals for our own campus, and again, been able to try new things and try new approaches and technologies, and seen what works and what doesn't, and tell those stories so that other people can realize their goals as well. So we can do this work. We can catalyze planetary solutions from Yale to Connecticut to the country to the world through all that we are and all that we do. And because we can do this, because Yale can, we must. And with that, I am happy to end. And Sara and I are happy to stick around and take any questions that you guys might have. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Julie and Sara. That was a fantastic presentation and so comprehensive. It's wonderful to see all the things happening here at Yale. And I want to thank everybody in the audience for all of your lively comments in the chat. We have time for Q&A and have a bit more of a conversation with Julie and Sara. And I see that we've got some questions in the Q&A box. I want to just share with you that we're lucky because we have two presenters today, which means Sara has been thankfully responding to some of the chat comments, but it's so much easier for me to make sure I cover all your questions if you put them in the Q&A section rather than in the chat. So with that, I note that William started out with a question saying, what specific solutions have you found on campus to lowering energy demand? But I think that was answered. I think, William, that was answered in the very moment that you asked it with the things that Julie and Sara presented. So I'm going to move on to Anne's questions regarding Yale's climate goals. How is Yale managing its use of water, pesticides, and herbicides on its playing fields and golf course? Is there a plan and schedule to use gray water or simply much less water, fewer or no pesticides and herbicides? That's what Anne would like to know about. There we go.
So I'm going to flip this over to Sara in a minute, who's been working much more closely with our Office of Sustainability, which is driving the campus planning and operations around this work. There are goals and plans around water use and pesticides and herbicides, as you mentioned. And so we have a current plan for campus that wraps up at the end of this year. And part of that summit series I talked about will be setting new goals for the next maybe 3 to 5 years to really have accountability and make sure that we know and have the data of what people are doing and that people are reporting in on that. That's been one of the challenges under the current plan. I don't know, Sara, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of systems knowledge to add here. And although, hi, Anne, nice to get your question. As you know, I worked at the School of the Environment for a number of years, and part of my role was engaging with the facilities teams around issues like this. Where we found them to be really willing partners and thinking creatively about how to manage all sorts of different pest and weed related issues. On the permeable paving that was put in all around Croon Hall, for example, they experimented with large wire brush systems that would go along and remove weeds from the pathways instead of spraying them. I think we still have a ways to go before that is a campus-wide strategy. But I think that we have some really willing partners there and a lot of opportunity to move the ball forward over the coming years.
Wonderful. I want to just jump in with a bit of a housekeeping question. Mark asked, where will the slides be posted? So this presentation has been recorded, and the recording and the slides, along with Resources that Julie and Sarah have provided will be available on the Yale Alumni Academy website after the presentation. It takes us sometimes a couple of days just to process all the information and get it posted, but you can find it on the Yale Alumni Academy website, which you can find just by searching for Yale Alumni Academy. And I will send you a link also in the chat to the page for this presentation. And thank you, Julie and Sarah, for being willing to make your slides available. I've seen some folks saying that they do intend to use the slides. All right, we've got lots of great questions. So Gary says, I'm frightened that the proposed tax on university endowments and loss of tax exempt status will negatively impact Planetary Solutions work. Do you have I don't know if this is tongue in cheek, Gary, but it sounds a little bit to me. Do you have a systems engineering plan to mitigate this if it happens?
Thanks. Yeah, that is a great question and one we've talked a lot about. And it's not just Planetary Solutions, it's lots of work on campus that could be impacted. I think what's interesting in this political environment is universities like Yale are really being challenged to say what is our societal value that we bring. And so thinking about and speaking with our new president and our provost, there's, some very clear answers to that. One is the emphasis the university has on financial aid and first generation low income students and supporting them on campus. The second has always been around the health sciences, clinical practice, drug discovery, new medicines. And it's becoming very clear that the third bucket and the response to this will be around the work we do on climate and what the university has to offer in terms of societal benefit, helping those communities, translating our work. So I think we will become even more important and not less so as resources become more constrained.
Let's go to our next question. We've got lots of good questions coming in. Reminder, if you want us to address your question, please do put it in the Q&A box, not in the chat. Helene says, thank you for all the great information about climate, but is there a corresponding goal to support biodiversity?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we have a current sustainability plan for campus that will end at the end of this academic year. And we are working right now to write the next plan that will be under the Planetary Solutions umbrella and will be organized around those three lenses. So we'll revisit our current climate goal, given the changes that are happening around AI and energy use and what we're learning. And then we'll write goals for both biodiversity and communities and society.
Okay, I have a little bit of a complicated question/point from Eben Rose, but I think very interesting one. So presenters, if you'll indulge me in a bit of a long question. Eben says, all of this seems quite techno-optimistic, i.e. that climate change and the ecosystem collapse more generally will be solved by some technology rather than by behavioral change. And Eben quotes a Nature article entitled Scientists Warning on Affluence, which I will link in the chat. This article highlights that the consumptive appetites of the wealthy are shaping supply chains to suit their unsustainable habits and purveying an unsustainable image of quote unquote the good life worldwide, sort of driving a demand for an image of what an elite successful life looks like through social media channels and otherwise, that then causes everyone to aspire to something that isn't actually sustainable when it comes to climate. So the question is, what about serious scholarly models on degrowth?
That's a great question. And what we like to talk about is the word abundance and this idea of looking at natural systems, and no one complains about there being too many trees or too much grass. And it's how does Mother Nature supply all of that material and energy and all the flows that are happening around us, and how do we mimic that in our industrial systems? So that's one piece of thinking about how to provide and meet that societal demand in a way that is more sustainable and mimicking how Mother Nature does it. The second piece is there's a lot of research happening on campus around social systems, around behavior change, around how to communicate um, and meet people where they are in terms of what actions need to be taken. And so there is scholarship happening in all those different domains. And our faculty in the arts and humanities are really interested in this storytelling piece. Um, I'm thinking about from operas that have been written to musical pieces to artwork. The dean of the music school is one of our, strongest supporters and partners in some of the programming we've done. And thinking about how do you raise awareness about these issues and elicit action and activity through different ways of communicating and engaging with people instead of just saying do less, want less, have less. It's how do you have an abundant life in a way that is sustainable.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I want to go to Eric Fine's question. Besides looking at the probability of hitting Yale's 2035 and 2050 climate goals, are you also looking at the possibility and potential benefits of shifting those goals to achieve them sooner?
Yeah, I mean, Yale is, I hope you're all aware, there is a new geothermal plant that's being built on campus. So the university just invested $200 million in building out geothermal to do heating and cooling. This will be the first district scale of geothermal on campus, and it will be a model. And if we're successful in that, then the geothermal work and infrastructure on campus will be replicated, and that can scale quite quickly. So there is some new technology that's coming to bear, and Yale is reliant on the energy grid that's here in the state of Connecticut, and it's how fast can that grid be greened, and what role does the university have in changing our regional grid in addition to what we can produce on our own campus. So these are all questions that we're thinking about and are working with great urgency, I would say, to advance the solutions that make the most sense from environmental climate perspective, and being able to roll out technology at a scale that can be reliable and demonstrated to be successful. And so this geothermal plant is a great model for that.
Well, we've got some folks who want to know how they can collaborate. So Alexandra asks, as an alumna building a climate tech startup, what would be the best way to collaborate with Yale faculty, students, and Yale Planetary Solutions, particularly as it relates to R&D and partnering on grant funding opportunities?
Yes, this is exactly what we are looking for, is how to translate and connect our faculty and our work outside the university. So the best way to get involved is, I think the link for our newsletter went by. You can email Sara and I directly, as everybody's way of wanting to engage with faculty is different. We don't have one size fits all, but we're happy to chat with you and figure out what your needs are and make sure you get connected to the right people on campus. I don't know, Sara, if you have anything else to add on that.
Well, I
I'll
think
just say that the subscribe.yale.edu link actually does require you to search for Yale Planetary Solutions. So that's the trick in how to find us, because there's quite a long list of things you can subscribe to.
wonderful. If you can't figure it out, you can just email us at alumniacademy@yale.edu and say, I want to be subscribed, and we'll just send your emails to Julie and Sara so they can add you to the list. I want to go to Hillary's comment. Also along the lines of collaboration, Hillary says, I've been working on landscape, soil, and growing issues for a long time. Is there a way I can help determine the next plan for the campus landscape? I started looking into this after seeing what Harvard did that was part of a This Old House segment. There's much that is the same between agriculture and landscaped, and regeneration is entirely possible.
Sara, I'm going to turn that to you as our summit leader about how to engage alumni in that process.
Yeah, this conversation has been really, I think, inspiring me a bit to think more deeply about how we can best engage alumni and make sure we capture your voices and ideas in the summit process. So perhaps I lost the name, Alexandra, I think, oh no. Maybe that was Alexandra's question, but whomever it was who raised it, I would love to have you reach out and we can brainstorm a bit more about best pathways to get alumni involved. And for those YBG folks on the call, I'll certainly be reaching out to you all as well to help brainstorm about engaging alumni in the planning process.
It was Alexandra and Hillary.
Okay,
Both of
great,
them.
thank you.
And the presenters will get the Q&A after this is over, so you all will have a chance to see who asked what. And for those of you who are putting your questions in the Q&A and in the chat, your questions will be visible to our presenters. They'll get to follow up. Let's see, we have things that could go in a few different ways. I want to talk about Frederick's question, since we do like to time the climate change conversation series with the COP event. And so Frederick asks, what has Yale been doing this year at COP?
Yeah, so this year was quite unusual. Last year in Dubai, we had 70 people from the university go. We send undergraduate students as part of a class and actually attach them to delegations from countries that are under-resourced, so that as the negotiation is happening, our students are doing research to inform those countries' negotiators, the Maldives, Zimbabwe. We had a number of different countries that asked for this resource. What does this mean for tourism in my country, or trade, or economic development, so that our students are in the room where it's happening and providing this great resource. So that's really exciting. Our faculty are often there and leading panels or discussions, or bringing new tools and new policies to bear. And so there's always some really interesting dialogue that is happening that's informed by Yale research and researchers. And we have been partnering with other institutions of higher education on what is the role of this sector. We're not government, we're not business, we're not NGO. What are we, and what do we uniquely have to do when it comes to addressing the climate crisis? This year in Baku, they redistributed who had access to go to the event, and Yale was only given one slot. And so we had a much smaller footprint in Baku at the COP this year. And so still have students there who are part of that class, and a few faculty who went, but it was a much smaller presence and seemingly a much smaller meeting overall anyway.
Okay, talking about students, Rosella asks, is it a requirement for all incoming students across all schools to learn some basic climate 101 science and policy? Given the dangerous misinformation in the US evidenced by the recent election, this is a huge lever, says Rosella.
Yes, that's a great question, and one we are really interested in engaging on. So all we have done right now is to collect up all the classes that are talking about climate change and making students aware that these classes are available, and one's in every corner of campus, from anthropology to nursing to the School of Management. And the other thing that we're working on right now is there is an undergraduate major in environmental studies, and looking at that and reviewing it and updating it to be more contemporary, and thinking about what classes we can stand up there that would be broadly available to the whole campus and anyone who's really interested in learning about these issues.
Fantastic. Just in terms of learning about these issues, John says, how do we engage a public that generally doesn't think that climate change is a big problem? So sort of following on to Rosella's point of, getting people to recognize that it's a problem and getting them to understand their role in it. I note, John, for your question, that Eric Fine is presenting a topic called Climate Change in the American Mind next Monday in this very same time slot, 12 o'clock, November 25th. That'll be the last of our climate change conversations. And Eric will be representing the Yale program on climate communication. So delving entirely into that point. But Julia, I'd love to give you and Sara a chance to speak on it too.
I would have pointed you to the program on climate change communication. So again, Planetary Solutions is amplifying what's happening already on campus and trying to catalyze new work. And so looking back at our faculty that have been incredibly successful and impactful in this space, and the program for climate change communication is one of those. So understanding that there are many different people in America who have different cares, and making sure that you connect climate change. If you're a hunter or a fisher, or you like chocolate or you drink wine, that there's a connection to climate change. And um, that program also does climate connections on NPR, on National Public Radio. They do 45-second stories so that you can learn about how whatever topic you're interested in is connected back to climate, to raise that awareness and try to elicit action.
Wonderful. Okay, we have one last question that we didn't get to. Um, Alexandra says, I'm curious about your characterization of problems. So, what is the sort of ideology behind that approach? Is it an idiosyncratic approach? Is it part of a standard approach for analyzing problems? And I think Alexandra's referring to sort of what you presented in the beginning, which is, the various problems that you laid out before you started talking about how to tackle them.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that we're broadly interested in problems. And so we are trying to encourage faculty, whether they're working on water or food or health or urban or poverty or justice, that what is the connection to climate and sustainability in that? And then not just studying how bad the problem is and making sure we get the eighth decimal place right. Well, there's a place for that, that we also need to act at this moment, and making sure that we are supporting our students and faculty who are really interested in bringing solutions to bear. So we are quite agnostic on the problem that people are approaching, and rather really focused on helping them bring their solutions to the world and moving them again out of Yale and off campus to actually be useful in addressing these crises.
Excellent. Thank you. We've had a really lively chat and a lot of great questions posed in the Q&A. And I thank you, Julie and Sara, for kicking us off on our 5th annual climate change series. And I also thank you for bringing Yale Planetary Solutions to the table as a co-sponsor for this series. This interdisciplinary work is uncommon in universities, and yet it's exactly what these institutions should be doing. So I think our alumni are on board with the idea that, you should be supported, cheered on, and highlighted in every way possible. And so we're delighted to be a partner with you here at the Climate Change Conversation Series from Yale Alumni Academy. And I hope everyone else will tune in to the next in these conversations, which will be tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a presentation in the afternoon. It's going to be 3 to 4:30. We'll be hearing from Jody Sherman, who will speak on balancing patient safety and public harm. You can find the whole entire schedule of climate change conversations on the alumniacademy.yale.edu website. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Julie and Sara, for any final comments that you would like to make.
Oh, I just want to say thank you for your time and your attention. I know everyone is really, really busy, and we are looking for partners and stakeholders who are excited and interested in this work. So please be in touch, and we are really delighted to engage with people who have a connection to Yale and can help advance this work. So thank you.
And I'll just add a note of thanks. So nice to see names I recognize from alumni classes over many years. So great to have everybody here. And thank you so much for your time and attention.
All right, well, thank you all. And we'll be in touch with everyone who registered for this with a follow-up email that will give you all the links and things that we've promised. And I hope to see you on the next climate change conversation. Bye-bye, everyone.